In 1838, the Ellison breeding complex, the largest forced birth farm in the American South, recorded something its overseers swore was impossible. Every one of its 500 enslaved women vanished in a single night. Hours earlier, Captain Silas Harrow had finalized a mass sale that would scatter those women across 5 states, confident that the system controlling them was too tightly engineered to ever crack. By dawn, the farm's ledgers were ash, its holding pens collapsed, and its entire infrastructure destroyed with a precision none of the owners could explain. Harrow survived long enough to report only one detail. The women had not fled blindly. They moved with coordination he never imagined they possessed. How did 500 captive women dismantle the very empire built to contain them? What did Harrow overlook that sealed the farm's destruction? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Dawn broke gray over the Ellison breeding complex. Mara Ellison moved through the infirmary's dim interior, her calloused hands sorting dried herbs with practiced efficiency, lavender for calming, willow bark for fever, yarrow to slow bleeding. She arranged clean cloths in neat stacks on the scarred wooden table, her movements deliberate and precise. The air smelled of lye soap and old blood. Mara was 42 years old, though the lines around her eyes made her look older. Her dark hair was pulled back tight beneath a faded headscarf. She wore the same worn gray dress she'd worn for 3 years, patched at the elbows and hem. Her reputation among the 500 women on the farm was simple. Mara delivered babies safely. She knew which herbs stopped infections. She understood when to push and when to wait. She spoke quietly but firmly, and when she gave instructions during labor, everyone listened. The women trusted her because she had never lost her gentleness, even here. The infirmary door swung open. Morning light cut across the floor. Captain Silas Harrow stepped inside, his boots striking the floorboards with sharp precision. He was tall and lean, maybe 35, with pale skin that looked like it never saw honest work. His uniform was immaculate. Every button gleamed. His dark hair was combed back so severely it looked painted on. "Mrs. Ellison," he said. His voice was soft, almost pleasant. "I trust the facility is prepared." Mara kept her eyes down. "Yes, Captain." Harrow had arrived 3 weeks ago with a leather case full of documents and new rules he called efficiency reforms. He timed meals to the minute. He reorganized work assignments based on calculations he made in a small notebook. He walked through the quarters after dark, counting heads, making marks in his ledger. Everything was about numbers with Captain Harrow. He moved to the window and looked out across the farm. "The Harper woman is in active labor, I'm told." "Yes, sir. Lydia. She's been laboring since midnight." "And your assessment?" Mara hesitated. "The baby is positioned wrong, turned sideways. It needs time to shift, or I need to—" "How much time?" "Could be hours. Could be longer. Births don't follow schedules." Harrow turned to face her. His expression never changed. "Everything follows schedules, Mrs. Ellison. You simply haven't found the correct one yet." A young woman appeared in the doorway. Her name was Ruth. She was breathing hard. "Mara, please, Lydia's asking for you." Mara grabbed her basket of supplies and followed Ruth to the small birthing room at the back of the infirmary. Harrow's footsteps followed close behind. Lydia Harper lay on a narrow cot, her face slick with sweat. She was maybe 20 years old, small-boned and fragile. Her breathing came in shallow gasps. 2 other women knelt beside her, holding her hands. Their faces were tight with worry. Mara set down her basket and placed a gentle hand on Lydia's swollen belly. She felt the position of the baby, still sideways. The contractions were getting stronger, but nothing was progressing. "Lydia, honey, I need you to breathe with me," Mara said quietly. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. Just like that." Lydia's eyes were glassy with pain and exhaustion. "I can't. Mara, I can't." "You can. You've done this before." Mara soaked a cloth in cool water and pressed it to Lydia's forehead. She began working her hands along Lydia's abdomen, trying to encourage the baby to turn. The technique required patience. It required time. Harrow cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ellison, what is the delay?" "No delay, Captain. The baby needs to shift position before it can come." "Then shift it." "I'm trying, sir. These things take—" "I've read the medical texts. External manipulation should take 15 minutes at most." Mara's jaw tightened. "The books don't account for every situation." "Then perhaps you're not using the correct technique." The other women in the room went very still. Mara kept her hands on Lydia's belly, kept working, kept trying to feel which way the baby might turn. Lydia cried out as another contraction hit. Her back arched off the cot. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then 2. Lydia's breathing changed. It became shallow and rapid. Her lips took on a grayish tint. Mara recognized the signs immediately. Something was wrong internally. Bleeding, most likely. Maybe a tear. Maybe the placenta separating too early. "Captain, I need you to leave," Mara said. Her voice was firm now. "I need space to work. I need to observe the—" "Get out." Mara didn't look at him. Her hands moved faster, checking Lydia's pulse, lifting her eyelids. "Ruth, get me the yarrow. All of it." Harrow didn't move. "Mrs. Ellison, you will remember if you want this baby to live, you'll let me work." Harrow studied her for a long moment. Then he turned and left, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Mara worked for another hour. She used every technique she knew. She tried to slow the bleeding. She tried to shift the baby. She tried to save them both. Lydia stopped breathing just after noon. The baby never drew breath at all. Mara sat back on her heels, her hands stained red. The other women in the room began to weep. Quiet, careful weeping. The kind that didn't make noise. The kind that had learned not to draw attention. Ruth covered Lydia's face with a clean cloth. Mara closed her eyes. She had delivered hundreds of babies in her life. She had brought new life into this terrible place, again and again. Each time, she felt the same crushing weight. Another child born into chains. Another mother whose body was used and discarded. She had spent her entire life delivering children into a system designed to exploit them. When Harrow returned an hour later, he didn't ask questions. He simply made a note in his ledger and walked out. The women cleaned Lydia's body in silence. Dusk settled over the farm. Mara moved through the infirmary alone, scrubbing blood from the floor with a stiff brush. Her back ached. Her hands shook slightly from exhaustion. She worked methodically, same as always, because there was comfort in routine. She dragged the birthing cot away from the wall to clean beneath it. Something caught her eye. The corner of a leather-bound book jutted out from beneath the medicine cabinet. Mara frowned. She kept the infirmary organized. Nothing was ever left out of place. She set down her brush and knelt. The book was wedged tight, as though someone had shoved it there quickly. She worked it free and stood, turning it over in her hands. A ledger. The leather cover was embossed with the initials EBC Ellison Breeding Complex. Mara glanced toward the door. The infirmary was empty. The farm was quiet. She carried the ledger to the small table in the corner and lit the oil lantern. The wick caught, and warm light spilled across the worn pages. She opened the book. The first page contained neat columns of writing in black ink. Names, ages, physical descriptions, medical histories, sale values. Mara's breath caught in her throat. She turned the page. More names, more values. Transport routes written in a kind of shorthand she didn't fully understand. Dates, destinations. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. And then she saw it. Annalise Ellison, age 14. Light field work. Literate. Value, $800. Route, 4. Date, November 18th. November 18th was 11 days away. Mara stared at her daughter's name until the letters blurred. She whispered it aloud in the empty room, her voice barely more than breath. Annalise. Mara turned the page. More names filled the columns. Women she knew. Women she had delivered babies for. Women who worked beside her in the fields and the kitchens and the laundry house. Sarah Mitchell, age 28. Strong constitution. Value, $950. Patience Williams, age 19, recent mother. Value, $700. Rebecca Stone, age 45, experienced cook. Value, $600. The numbers went on and on. Mara's finger traced down the page, her heart beating faster with each line. Every woman on the farm was listed. Every single one. She flipped ahead, scanning the dates written in Harrow's precise handwriting. November 18th, November 21st, November 25th. All within weeks. 500 women, sold in batches, scattered across different plantations in different states. The routes were coded, but she recognized some of the abbreviations: Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Texas. Mara pressed her palm flat against the page, as if she could stop the words from being true. Her breathing came shallow and quick. The lantern flame wavered, casting jumping shadows across the walls. She remembered the day Annalise was born. 14 years ago, in a different infirmary on a different farm. Mara had labored alone through the night, biting down on a leather strap to keep from crying out. When the baby finally came, slick and wailing, Mara had held her daughter against her chest and felt something inside herself crack open. Love, fierce and terrible and absolute. She had whispered promises into Annalise's tiny ear. Promises she couldn't keep. Promises about safety and futures and freedom. Every day since, she had failed those promises, but Annalise had survived. She had grown into a bright, quick-minded girl who learned to read by watching Mara's hands move across the pages of medical texts. She asked questions nobody else dared ask. She smiled at the younger children and taught them songs. Annalise believed in something better, even here. And now, Harrow was going to sell her. Mara turned more pages, her hands shaking. She found the final section of the ledger. A summary page. Total inventory, 500. Total projected revenue, $380,000. Buyer contacts. Delivery schedules. It was all planned, all decided. Their fates had been predetermined without warning, without consultation, without mercy. She closed the ledger and sat in the dark, listening to her own heartbeat. The lantern burned lower. Sunrise came pale and cold. Mara hid the ledger beneath a stack of clean bandages in the medicine cabinet, tucking it far back where no one would look unless they were searching. She washed her face in the basin and braided her hair with trembling fingers. She had to act normal. She had to avoid suspicion. The day's work began as it always did. Women filed past the infirmary for morning inspections. Mara checked pregnant bellies, distributed willow bark for aches, treated a burned hand. She moved through the routine automatically, her mind spinning. Around mid-morning, Harrow appeared on the grounds. He walked with his hands clasped behind his back, surveying everything with that same calm expression. He stopped at the laundry house and spoke to the supervisor. Then he moved to the kitchens, then the work sheds. He carried his small notebook. He made marks as he walked. By noon, he had introduced 3 new rules. Morning roll call would now happen at 5 instead of 6. Meal portions would be standardized and measured. Work assignments would rotate weekly to prevent inefficient familiarity with tasks. The women received the news in silence. Mara watched from the infirmary window as Harrow crossed the yard. He moved like a man who believed order could solve everything. Like cruelty was just another form of organization. She hated him with a clarity that frightened her. In the afternoon, Mara was sent to retrieve supplies from an old storage shed at the far edge of the property. The shed had been used decades ago, back when the farm was smaller. Now it mostly held broken equipment and mouse-eaten sacks of grain. She pushed open the warped wooden door. Dust motes swirled in the dim light. She found the crate of lamp oil she needed and hefted it onto her hip. As she turned to leave, her foot caught on something. She stumbled, catching herself against the wall. The boards beneath her hand shifted slightly. She frowned and pressed harder. The wall panel moved. Mara set down the crate and examined the boards more closely. They were old, weathered, loose in their frame. She worked her fingers into the gap and pulled. The panel came away, revealing darkness behind it. A tunnel. Mara's breath caught. She knelt and peered inside. The passage was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide, constructed of timber supports and packed earth. It smelled of rot and stale air, but she could feel a faint breeze moving through it. She glanced back toward the shed door. No one was nearby. The afternoon work crews were all in the fields. She crawled inside. The tunnel floor was damp beneath her palms. The supports creaked overhead. She moved slowly, testing each section, expecting collapse. But the passage held. After maybe 20 feet, the tunnel widened slightly. Light filtered in from somewhere ahead. Mara crawled faster, her heart hammering. The tunnel ended at a camouflaged exit, near a dry riverbed. Brush and dead vines covered the opening. She pushed through and emerged into daylight, blinking. The riverbed stretched away to the north, hidden from the main farm by a ridge of trees. No patrols would see anyone moving through here. No dogs could track scent across dried stone. Mara stared at the landscape, her mind racing. This was built for smuggling, maybe during the territorial conflicts decades back. She'd heard old stories about hidden routes, but she'd never believed them. She crawled back through the tunnel and replaced the wall panel in the shed. She carried the lamp oil back to the infirmary before anyone noticed her absence. That evening, after the final meal bell, Mara found Eliza Ward near the well. Eliza was a few years younger than Mara, lean and sharp-eyed. She had a reputation for seeing through lies and asking dangerous questions. Some women avoided her. Mara trusted her. "I need to talk to you," Mara said quietly. "Somewhere private." Eliza studied her face. The old curing shed. 20 minutes. They met in the abandoned building where tobacco used to hang. The air still smelled faintly sweet. Mara told her everything: the ledger, the sale dates, Annalise's name, the tunnel. Eliza listened without interrupting. When Mara finished, Eliza was silent for a long moment. "You're talking about running," Eliza said finally. "I'm talking about surviving. 500 women don't just vanish, Mara. They'll hunt us. They'll send dogs and marshals and they're selling us anyway." Mara's voice was steady. "In pieces. To different places. We'll never see each other again. Our children will disappear. Everything we've built here, every connection, every bit of family we've made, it's already gone. Harrow just hasn't told us yet." Eliza looked out through the broken slats of the shed. "You're sure about the tunnel?" "I crawled through it. It leads to the riverbed. Clear path north. And you think we can move 500 women through a smuggling tunnel without anyone noticing? I think we don't have another choice." Eliza was quiet again. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "We'll need time. We'll need planning. We'll need people we can trust to spread the word without panic. I know. And we'll need to be ready to fight if it comes to that." Mara met her eyes. "I know." Midnight came cold and clear. Mara and Eliza stood at the entrance to the tunnel, hidden in the storage shed. They could hear patrol dogs barking in the distance, making their rounds along the farm's perimeter. Eliza looked at the dark opening. "Once we start this, there's no going back." "There's already no going back," Mara said. "Harrow made sure of that." Eliza extended her hand. Mara took it. They shook once, firmly, sealing the pact between them. "We get everyone out," Eliza said. "Or we die trying." "We get everyone out," Mara agreed. They stood together in the darkness, listening to the dogs, and began to plan liberation. Dawn came with the smell of wood smoke and dew. Mara stood at the infirmary window, watching the yard fill with women moving toward morning inspection. Only hours had passed since she and Eliza sealed their pact in the darkness. Her body ached from exhaustion, but her mind was clear. She had work to do. Eliza appeared at the door, carrying an empty water bucket. To anyone watching, she was simply making her rounds. But when she met Mara's eyes, the message was plain. It's time. Mara picked up her medical bag and stepped outside. The morning air was cool against her skin. Women stood in loose lines across the yard, waiting for roll call. Mara moved among them, checking pregnant bellies, distributing herbs for morning sickness, asking quiet questions about aches and pains. As she worked, she hummed. The tune was old, passed down through generations. Most overseers dismissed it as meaningless noise, but the women knew every verse, every variation. This morning, Mara changed the rhythm slightly. She held certain notes longer. She repeated a phrase 3 times instead of 2. The women nearest her went still. Then they began humming along, carrying the altered melody through the crowd. The signal spread like ripples in water. Eliza moved through the laundry house, her hands sorting through linens. She folded sheets in specific patterns, laying them across drying lines in sequences that looked random but weren't. The women working beside her noticed. They adjusted their own work to match. Codes within codes. Messages hidden in plain sight. By mid-morning, small clusters of women had received their instructions. Groups of 3 or 4 would test different sections of the tunnel throughout the day, moving under the pretense of various chores. Some would carry supplies to the storage shed. Others would memorize the locations where fires needed to start. Mara visited the kitchens, ostensibly checking on a cook's swollen ankles. While she wrapped the woman's leg, she whispered locations: storage barn, administrative building, equipment shed. The cook nodded once and continued kneading dough. Everything had to look normal. Everything had to flow like any other day. Around noon, Mara made her way to the children's area, where Annalise helped supervise the younger one. Her daughter sat cross-legged in the dirt, teaching a small girl how to braid grass into patterns. Mara knelt beside them. "How are you feeling today?" Annalise looked up. Her eyes were so bright, so full of trust. "I'm good, Mama. Teaching Bess how to make stars." "That's beautiful." Mara touched her daughter's cheek. "Listen carefully. Tonight, when the bell rings for evening meal, I need you to bring the children to the infirmary. Tell them we're checking everyone for fever. Can you do that?" Annalise's smile faded slightly. She studied her mother's face. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. But I need you to trust me. And I need you to be very brave." "I'm always brave," Annalise said. Mara kissed her forehead. "I know you are." She stood and walked back toward the infirmary, forcing herself not to look back. If she looked back, she might break. She might pull Annalise close and never let go. But there was still too much work to do. Late afternoon brought disaster. Harrow appeared in the yard without warning, his notebook already open. He moved through the work areas with mechanical precision, examining everything. He checked inventory counts. He questioned supervisors. He inspected the storage sheds. Mara watched from the infirmary door, her heart hammering. If he found the tunnel entrance, everything would collapse. Harrow spent 10 minutes in the old storage shed. 10 minutes that felt like hours. When he finally emerged, his expression was unchanged. He made a note in his book and moved on to the next building. Mara exhaled slowly. The wall panel had held. The tunnel remained hidden, but the inspection heightened the urgency. They couldn't wait any longer. It had to be tonight. Evening chores began as the sun dropped toward the horizon. Women moved through familiar routines, hauling water, preparing meals, settling children for the night. But underneath the surface, everything had changed. Mara saw the signals everywhere. A woman adjusting her headscarf in a specific way. Another tapping her fingers against a water bucket in a deliberate rhythm. Small gestures that confirmed readiness. Eliza caught her eye from across the yard and nodded once. Everyone was in position. As darkness settled over the farm, women gathered children and whispered instructions. They carried essential supplies hidden beneath their clothes, herbs wrapped in cloth, blankets folded small, water skins tucked into waistbands. They moved in small groups toward predetermined meeting points, never rushing, never drawing attention. Mara stood at the infirmary door, watching them converge. Her medical bag was packed with everything she could carry. The ledger was tucked inside, evidence of what had been done to them. Annalise appeared with a group of children, guiding them forward. "Everyone's here, Mama." "Good girl." Mara looked at the assembled women. 500 faces, 500 stories, 500 lives that had been bought and sold and broken. "It's time." They moved in organized rows toward the storage shed. The tunnel entrance had been widened during the day, reinforced with stolen timber. Women descended in groups, older ones helping younger ones, mothers carrying infants, everyone moving with practiced silence. Mara waited until the first groups were through, then gave the signal. Fires bloomed across the property. The storage barn caught first, flames racing up the dry wooden walls. Then the administrative building, where records and ledgers documented their captivity. The equipment shed. The overseer's office, not the living quarters, not the kitchens or infirmaries or anywhere people might be trapped. Only structures, only the infrastructure of their imprisonment. Smoke rose into the night sky. Guards shouted and ran toward the flames with buckets. Dogs barked in confusion. Chaos spread like the fire itself, everyone scrambling to respond. Mara guided Annalise into the tunnel. "Stay close to me. Don't let go of my hand." They crawled through darkness, following the flow of women ahead. The tunnel was crowded now, packed with bodies and breathing and whispered prayers. But it held. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, they emerged at the dry riverbed. Fresh air hit Mara's face. Stars stretched overhead. Women poured out of the tunnel entrance, helping each other stand, gathering children, forming groups. 500 women, all of them free. Eliza appeared beside Mara, soot streaking her face. "Everyone's accounted for. No one left behind." "Then we move," Mara said. They walked north along the riverbed, moving as a coordinated mass. The smoke behind them glowed orange against the night sky. Mara could hear distant shouts, the sound of buildings collapsing. She held Annalise's hand and kept walking. Hours passed. The landscape changed from riverbed to forest. Trees closed around them, offering cover. The women moved in practiced silence, stepping where Eliza and the scouts indicated, avoiding roads and clearings. As dawn approached, they stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley they'd left behind. Mara turned to look back one last time. The breeding complex was burning. Flames consumed everything Harrow had built, everything the system had created. Smoke rose in thick columns, visible for miles. "It's really over," Annalise whispered. "We're really free." Mara pulled her daughter close. Around them, women embraced, cried, laughed with relief. They had done the impossible. They had escaped. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but theirs. Mara watched the sun rise over the burning ruins of their captivity, believing both danger and darkness were finally behind them. The sun climbed higher, but the women kept moving. Mara's legs ached. Her feet throbbed inside worn shoes. Around her, 500 women pushed forward through dense forest, stepping over roots and ducking beneath low branches. Some carried infants wrapped tight against their chests. Others supported elderly women who could barely walk. Children stumbled along, holding hands, too tired to complain. Only minutes had passed since they'd stopped to watch the farm burn. Now the forest surrounded them completely, thick with pine and oak. Birds called overhead. Somewhere nearby, water trickled over rocks. "Keep the line tight," Eliza called from the front. "Don't fall behind." They moved in a long column, organized into smaller groups of 20 or 30. Each group had a leader responsible for counting heads and reporting problems. Mara walked near the middle, keeping Annalise close while monitoring the pregnant women and mothers with newborns. The terrain grew rougher as morning wore on. Hills rose and fell. The ground turned soft with moss in some places, rocky and uneven in others. Women rotated responsibilities every few hours to keep anyone from collapsing under a single burden. Some gathered water whenever they crossed a stream. Others walked at the rear, watching for followers. A rotating group of scouts moved ahead, checking the path for obstacles or signs of habitation. Mothers took turns carrying each other's children when arms grew too tired. Mara watched it all, adjusting plans as needed. When a woman twisted her ankle, Mara wrapped it and assigned 2 others to support her weight. When an infant cried too loudly, she distributed herbs to soothe colic. When arguments broke out about which direction to travel, she listened to both sides and made final decisions. "We need to rest," a woman named Ruth said as noon approached. She was older, her face lined with exhaustion. "Some of us can't keep this pace. We rest when we have real cover," Eliza responded sharply. "Not before. People are going to collapse if we don't stop. People are going to die if we do." Mara stepped between them. "We'll rest at the next water source. 1 hour, then we keep moving." Ruth looked like she wanted to argue but didn't. Eliza simply nodded and continued walking. They reached a narrow creek around mid-afternoon. The women collapsed along its banks, drinking deeply and refilling water skins. Mara moved among them, checking for injuries and illness. Most were simply exhausted. Some had blistered feet. A few showed signs of fever. Annalise sat with a group of children, all of them so quiet, it broke Mara's heart. They should be playing, laughing, acting like children. Instead, they sat in silence, understanding, without being told, that noise meant danger. "Mama, how long until we can stop for real?" Annalise asked. "I don't know, baby. Not yet." "Are we safe now?" Mara wanted to say yes. She wanted to promise her daughter that the worst was over. But she'd learned long ago that lies, even kind ones, eventually caused more harm than truth. "We're safer than we were," she said instead. "That's something." The hour ended too quickly. Eliza gave the signal, and everyone rose, groaning and stretching sore muscles. They formed their column again and continued north. Rain came on the second day. It started as a light drizzle around dawn, then grew heavier as morning progressed. Water dripped through the forest canopy, soaking clothes and making the ground slippery. Women wrapped blankets around children's shoulders. Mothers tried to shelter infants from the downpour. The pace slowed. Footing became treacherous on muddy slopes. Twice, women fell and had to be helped back to their feet. Progress that should have taken hours stretched into most of the day. Arguments grew more frequent. Some wanted to find shelter and wait out the rain. Others insisted they needed to keep moving regardless of weather. Tensions rose as exhaustion deepened. "We can't keep going like this," Ruth said during a brief pause beneath a rocky overhang. "Look at everyone. We're falling apart." "Then we fall apart moving forward," Eliza countered. "We stop, we die. We don't stop, we die anyway. We need real rest, real shelter." Mara listened to them argue, understanding both perspectives. They did need rest. But Eliza was right that stopping meant increased risk of capture. She was about to intervene when a voice spoke from the trees. "You're all going to die if you keep making this much noise." Every woman froze. Hands reached for makeshift weapons, rocks, sharp sticks, anything available. Mara stepped forward, positioning herself between the voice and the children. A man emerged from behind a thick oak. He was tall, maybe 30 years old, with dark skin and careful eyes. He carried a walking stick but no visible weapons. His clothes were worn but well maintained. "Who are you?" Mara demanded. "Name's Jonah Price." He raised both hands, showing empty palms. "I'm a free man. Been tracking in these woods for years. Heard you coming from a mile away." "You alone?" Eliza asked, her voice hard with suspicion. "Completely. And if I could hear you, so can the patrols." Jonah studied them, his expression shifting from caution to something like sympathy. "You're the ones from the Ellison farm. Heard about the fire. Whole region's talking about it." Mara's stomach tightened. "How many people know?" "Enough. Marshals were called in yesterday. They're organizing search parties." He paused. "You need help." "We don't need anything from you," Eliza said. "Then you won't make it another 3 days." Jonah pointed north. "There's an abandoned hunting cabin about 2 hours that direction. Nobody's used it in years. You could shelter there tonight, dry out, get proper rest. After that, I know routes that avoid the main roads, places patrols don't watch." "Why would you help us?" Mara asked. Jonah met her eyes. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because I spent too many years watching injustice and doing nothing about it. I'm done watching." The women looked at each other. Some seemed convinced. Others remained suspicious. Mara weighed the options, knowing they needed guidance, but aware that trust could be weaponized. "What do you want in return?" she asked. "Nothing but your trust," Jonah said. "I know that's asking a lot, but I'm offering what I can." Mara studied him for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "Show us to the cabin. After that, we'll decide." The cabin was small and half-collapsed, but it had a roof and walls. The women crowded inside and under the covered porch, finally sheltered from the rain. They built small fires for warmth, keeping smoke minimal. For the first time since escaping, they could rest without fear of immediate exposure. Jonah stayed at the edge of camp, respecting their space. When Mara brought him food, he accepted it quietly. "How long before the patrols reach this area?" she asked. "Depends on their tracking. Could be days. Could be sooner if they find your trail." He looked at the exhausted women around them. "You did something impossible, getting this many people out. But the hard part's just beginning." Mara knew he was right. She returned to the cabin and found Annalise asleep against her shoulder. Around them, women whispered prayers and held each other. Some cried silently. Others simply stared at nothing, processing what they'd done. Morning came too quickly. They packed up and continued north, following routes Jonah suggested. He walked ahead, reading the land with practiced ease. On the 3rd day, everything changed. The scouts returned just after dawn, their faces tight with fear. "There's evidence behind us. Broken branches, fresh hoof prints. Someone's following our trail." Mara felt ice spread through her chest. "How close?" "Maybe half a day. Maybe less." The women moved faster after that, abandoning caution for speed. They pushed through underbrush and climbed steep hillsides, everyone understanding that being caught meant death or worse. By twilight, they reached a densely wooded ridge. The trees grew so close together that movement became difficult. Mara ordered everyone to hide, to stay absolutely still. They crouched among the roots and shadows, mothers covering children's mouths, everyone barely breathing. In the distance, dogs began barking. Dawn broke gray and cold on the 4th day. Nobody had slept. The barking dogs had circled their position for hours before finally moving away, leaving everyone tense and exhausted. Women held children against their chests, feeling small heartbeats flutter like trapped birds. Jonah appeared at first light, moving silently through the trees. His expression was grim, but not panicked. "They passed us," he said quietly to Mara and Eliza. "Went east toward the main road. But they'll circle back once they realize they lost the trail." "How long do we have?" Mara asked. "Maybe a day. Maybe less. He studied the ridge. We need to move now. And we need to move smart. Where? Eliza's voice was sharp with fatigue and stress. Jonah pointed northwest. Swamp country. 2 hours from here. It'll slow us down, but it'll also hide our tracks. After that, there's a place I know. Somewhere you can actually rest. The women gathered their few belongings and followed him down the ridge. Morning light filtered through the canopy, painting everything in shades of green and shadow. They moved carefully, aware that noise could kill them as surely as capture. The swamp appeared gradually. First, the ground grew softer, then puddles formed between roots, then water rose to ankle depth. The air became thick with moisture and the smell of rotting vegetation. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds. Step where I step, Jonah instructed. Stay single file. The water will cover our footprints. Progress slowed to a crawl. Women helped each other over fallen logs and through deeper pools. Mothers carried children on their backs to keep them above the waterline. The elderly needed constant assistance to navigate the treacherous footing. Hours passed in this way. The sun climbed higher but remained hidden behind dense tree cover. Sweat mixed with swamp water. Clothes grew heavy and sodden. Several women developed cuts from sharp reeds hidden beneath the surface. Mara moved up and down the line, checking on everyone, offering encouragement, treating minor injuries. Her medicine supplies were running dangerously low, but she rationed carefully, using each herb and bandage only when absolutely necessary. Annalise walked beside her, face set in determination despite obvious exhaustion. She'd stopped asking when they could rest. She'd stopped asking if they were safe. Some childhood innocence had burned away during these days of flight, replaced by a grim understanding of their reality. It broke Mara's heart. It also made her proud. "How much further?" Ruth called from the middle of the line. "Not far now," Jonah responded. "Another hour." Some women groaned. Others simply kept walking, too tired even to react. The swamp gradually became shallower. Solid ground emerged in patches, then became more frequent. Finally, they climbed out onto dry land, everyone dripping and covered in mud. Jonah led them through thick forest for another half hour. Then the trees opened onto a clearing, and everyone stopped. "Sweet Jesus," someone whispered. Before them stood an old settlement. Cabins, maybe a dozen of them, formed a rough circle around a central area. The structures were weathered and partially collapsed, but they were real buildings with walls and roofs. Behind the cabins, terraced hillsides showed evidence of former farming. Stone cisterns stood at intervals, still intact despite years of abandonment. This was a maroon community, Jonah explained, built 40, maybe 50 years ago by people who escaped slavery and claimed their freedom. They lived here for decades before moving further north. Nobody's used it since. The women moved forward slowly, almost afraid to believe it was real. They'd been sleeping on the ground for days, huddled under makeshift shelters, always cold and exposed. The sight of actual buildings, even ruined ones, felt like a miracle. Mara walked to the nearest cabin and pushed open the door. Inside was a single room with a packed earth floor and a stone fireplace. The roof had holes, but most of it remained intact. Rough shelves lined one wall. A sleeping platform occupied another. It was the most beautiful thing she'd seen in years. "Mama, can we stay here?" Annalise asked, standing in the doorway. "Yes, baby. For a while, at least." Other women explored other cabins, calling out discoveries. Some structures were in better condition than others, but all offered more shelter than they'd had since escaping. Children ran between buildings, their voices rising in something almost like play. Eliza approached Mara, her expression cautious. "It's good, but we need to secure it. Set up watches. Make sure we can defend this place if we need to." "I know. Let everyone rest first. Then we'll organize." The day passed in focused activity. Women worked together to repair the most damaged cabins, using branches and mud to patch holes. Others cleaned out debris and made the interiors livable. A group investigated the cisterns and found that several still collected rainwater effectively. Mara established an infirmary in the sturdiest cabin, organizing her remaining supplies and checking on women who showed signs of illness or infection. She treated blistered feet, wrapped sprained ankles, and distributed herbs for various ailments. Several women had developed coughs from exposure. One had a fever that worried her. While Mara tended the sick, Eliza mapped the settlement's layout. She identified high points that could serve as lookout stations and planned defensive positions. She assigned women to watch duty and established signal systems for warnings. Other women explored the terraced hillsides and found wild vegetables growing among the weeds. Apparently, some crops had reseeded themselves year after year, waiting for someone to harvest them again. They gathered greens, dug up roots, and found fruit trees heavy with early summer produce. By dusk, the community had transformed. Cabins showed light through windows. Small fires burned in stone fireplaces. The smell of cooking food drifted through the settlement. For the first time since the escape, the women gathered for a real meal. It wasn't much: boiled greens, roasted roots, a few small birds some women had trapped, but they ate together around the old communal fire pit, sharing food and quiet conversation. Mara sat with Annalise, watching her daughter eat. The girl's face was thinner than it should be, marked by exhaustion and stress, but she was alive. She was free. That meant everything. "Is this our home now?" Annalise asked. "Maybe, if we can keep it safe. I like it here. It feels different. Like nobody owns it." Mara pulled her daughter close. "Nobody owns you either. Not anymore." That night, women slept in actual shelters for the first time in days. Mara made rounds, checking on everyone, before finally settling in her own cabin. Annalise curled against her side, breathing deeply in exhausted sleep. Mara closed her eyes and dreamed. In the dream, Annalise was older, maybe 20. She stood in this same settlement, but it was rebuilt and thriving. Children ran between houses. Women worked in gardens. Nobody looked over their shoulders in fear. Nobody jumped at sudden sounds. Annalise taught a group of children to read, her voice patient and clear. When she looked up and saw Mara watching, she smiled. A smile without shadows, without the weight of trauma pulling at its corners. It was just a dream, but it felt like prophecy. Mara woke before dawn. She rose quietly and stepped outside, careful not to disturb Annalise. Other women were already stirring, starting fires, beginning the work of another day. Jonah sat near the edge of the settlement, preparing his pack. Mara approached him. "You're leaving," she said. "At first light. I'm going to circle back and lay some false trails. Make it harder for the patrols to find you." He stood, adjusting his pack. "You should be safe here for a while. But keep watches posted. Trust your instincts." "Thank you. For everything." He nodded. "You did the impossible already. What comes next? You'll handle it." He paused. "I'll come back when I can. Bring supplies, if possible. But if I don't return, assume the patrols are too close and move on. We will." Jonah looked at the settlement, at the women beginning their day. "This place has good bones. People lived freely here once. They can again." He left as the sun rose, disappearing into the forest with the same quiet competence he'd shown since they met him. Mara watched until he was gone, then turned back to the settlement. Women emerged from cabins, stretching and talking. Children played near the cisterns. Someone started singing while preparing breakfast. It was a work song, the kind they'd sung on the farm, but the words had changed. Now it was about freedom, about building something new. Mara stood watching over them all, letting herself believe, just for this moment, that they'd finally found safe ground. Jonah left at sunrise. Mara stood at the settlement's edge and watched him disappear into the morning mist, his footsteps making no sound on the soft forest floor. He'd promised to return if he could. The if hung in the air like smoke. She turned back to face the settlement. Women were already emerging from cabins, ready to begin the day's work. There was so much to do. "We need organization," Eliza said, appearing at Mara's side. "Clear structure. If we're going to make this place livable, everyone needs assignments." Mara nodded. "You're right. Let's divide the work." They gathered the women in the central clearing after breakfast. Mara explained the plan. Rotate responsibilities daily so everyone learned multiple skills, but establish core teams for essential tasks. The first team focused on structural repairs. These women inspected every cabin, identifying which ones could be saved and which were too damaged. They gathered fallen branches from the forest, stripped bark for binding, and mixed mud with grass to create plaster for filling gaps. By the end of the first day, 3 cabins had weatherproof roofs again. The second team cleared brush and debris. They removed years of accumulated leaves and rotting wood from pathways between buildings. They pulled down vines that threatened to collapse weakened walls. They burned what couldn't be used and composted what could. The third team worked on water systems. They cleaned the stone cisterns, removing dirt and dead leaves, then tested each one to ensure it still collected and held rainwater properly. 4 of the 6 cisterns remained functional. That meant reliable water sources spread across the settlement. The fourth team focused on food. They expanded exploration of the terraced hillsides, mapping where different plants grew and which ones were edible. They found more fruit trees than initially spotted, apple trees gone wild, pear trees laden with small, hard fruit that would ripen later in summer, even a few peach trees. They also discovered evidence of old garden plots and began clearing them for replanting. Eliza established the security team personally. She selected women who were alert, quick-thinking, and calm under pressure. She taught them to move quietly through the forest, to read signs of disturbance, to recognize human presence versus animal activity. "We need alarm signals," she explained on the second day. "Something that sounds natural, but everyone will recognize." They developed a system using branch strikes against hollow logs, different patterns for different types of danger. 3 quick strikes meant someone approaching from the south. 2 slow strikes meant movement from the north. A continuous rapid pattern meant immediate threat requiring everyone to hide. Mara ran the infirmary and coordinated overall activities. She made rounds each morning, checking on the sick and injured, distributing remaining medicine carefully. She also kept mental notes on every woman's strengths and limitations, ensuring work assignments matched capabilities. On the third day, something beautiful happened. Annalise gathered a group of younger girls near one of the repaired cabins and began teaching them their letters. She used a stick to draw shapes in the dirt, showing them how to form A, B, C. The children clustered around her, faces bright with concentration. Mara stopped and watched. Her daughter, who'd spent her entire life being told she was property, that her only value was the children she might someday bear, was teaching, creating knowledge, building futures. "She's good at that," Ruth commented, pausing beside Mara with an armful of firewood. "She always wanted to learn. I taught her what I could in secret." "Well, now she can teach openly. That's something, isn't it?" It was everything. The fourth day brought rain, forcing everyone to test the cabin repairs under actual conditions. Most roofs held. The few that leaked got immediate attention and additional patches. The rain also filled the cisterns, ensuring their water supply remained adequate. By the 5th day, the settlement had transformed. Pathways were clear. Cabins stood straight and secure. Gardens showed the first signs of new planting. The communal fire pit was cleaned and reinforced with stones. Lookout positions were established at 3 high points around the perimeter. That evening, the women gathered for a communal meal that felt different from the one their first night there. This wasn't just exhausted relief. This was celebration. They'd worked together and built something real. They'd proven they could survive, adapt, create. The meal was still simple. Greens from the hillsides, fish from a nearby creek, berries gathered that afternoon. But it felt like abundance because they'd claimed it themselves. After eating, someone started singing. Not a work song this time. A song from before, from childhood memories of different lives. Others joined in. Voices layered together in harmony, filling the settlement with sound that wasn't sorrow or defiance, but simple joy. Children danced near the fire. Women clapped in rhythm. Even Eliza, always watchful and serious, smiled while keeping time with her hands. Annalise leaned against Mara's shoulder. "I like it here, Mama. I feel safe." Mara kissed her daughter's forehead. "Me too, baby." The gathering continued past dark. Stars appeared overhead, brilliant in the clear sky after yesterday's rain. The fire burned low but steady. Women talked quietly, or simply sat in companionable silence. This was peace. Real peace. The kind Mara had almost forgotten existed. Eventually people drifted to their cabins. The fire was banked for the night. Mara was preparing to take Annalise inside when one of the lookouts returned early from her post. The woman's name was Sarah, young and sharp-eyed. She approached Eliza and Mara with obvious concern. "What is it?" Eliza asked immediately. "Smoke," Sarah said. "To the west, maybe 3 miles out. Spotted it just before sunset." "Could be natural," Mara said, though her stomach tightened. "Too controlled," Sarah replied. "Too steady. That's a maintained campfire." Eliza's expression hardened. "Could be hunters, could be travelers, could be patrols." "Should we move?" another woman asked, overhearing. "Not yet," Eliza decided. "We don't know what it is. Moving blindly could be worse than staying put. But everyone sleeps alert tonight. Lookouts stay doubled. If anything changes, we wake everyone immediately." The peaceful mood shattered like dropped glass. Women returned to their cabins, but nobody really slept. Mara lay awake beside Annalise, listening to every sound from outside, wondering if their 5 days of peace had already run out. The night passed slowly. Every branch crack sounded like footsteps. Every bird call might be a signal. Dawn arrived with agonizing slowness. Mara rose and stepped outside. Other women were doing the same, faces tight with tension. The lookouts reported nothing new during the night. No movement, no sounds. Just that distant smoke, still visible when Sarah climbed to the highest lookout point. They'd just gathered near the fire pit to discuss their options when movement erupted from the forest's edge. Jonah crashed into the clearing, breathing hard, clothes torn, face scratched from running through brush. Everyone froze. "Marshals!" he gasped out, bracing his hands on his knees. "Federal marshals. Harrow brought them. They're tracking you, and they're close. Maybe a day behind me, maybe less." He straightened, looking at Mara. "They know about this place. Someone talked or they found old maps. Either way, they're coming, and they're bringing force." Jonah's chest heaved as he struggled to catch his breath. The women pressed closer, forming a tight circle around him. "How many?" Eliza demanded. "How many marshals?" "6, that I counted, plus Harrow." "Maybe more I didn't see." Jonah wiped blood from a scratch on his cheek. "They're organized, professional. Not just slave catchers. Actual federal officers with tracking equipment and authorization papers." "How did they find us?" someone asked. "Your trail from the breeding complex led them to the riverbed. They found scattered tracks heading north. Harrow hired additional trackers, locals who know this territory. One of them remembered stories about the old maroon settlement. Once they had the general location, it was just a matter of searching systematically." Mara's mind raced. A day behind, maybe less. That meant immediate action was required, not planning or discussion. "We move now," she said. "Pack essentials. destroy evidence we were here, and scatter into smaller groups. No, Eliza's voice cut sharp. We stay and defend. Defend against federal marshals? Ruth protested. That's suicide. Running is suicide, Eliza countered. They're close enough to track us if we flee. We'd be vulnerable in open movement, especially with children and elders. Here we have defensive positions, fortifications, terrain advantage. We prepared for this exact situation. Jonah nodded reluctantly. She's right about movement being dangerous. But defending means confrontation. That brings consequences beyond just this moment. Everything brings consequences, Eliza said flatly. At least here we choose our ground. Mara looked at the settlement they'd worked so hard to restore. 5 days of labor. 5 days of hope. Now threatened by the same system that had pursued them since birth. We defend, she decided, but smart. Not violent unless absolutely necessary. We slow them down, make them cautious, create space to negotiate. Negotiate what? Sarah asked. Safe passage, formal recognition of our autonomy, documentation that we're free settlers, not fugitives. Even as Mara said it, she knew how unlikely it sounded. But what choice did they have? Eliza immediately took charge of defensive preparation. Security team, activate all trap positions. Everyone else, hide supplies and erase obvious signs of permanent settlement. Make it look like we're just passing through, not establishing residence. The women moved with practiced efficiency. They'd drilled this scenario during the past 3 days, never really believing they'd need it. The traps weren't designed to kill or seriously injure. They were strategic delays, tripwires connected to bells that would alert the settlement of approach, loose branches arranged to slow movement through certain paths, marker stones subtly placed to funnel pursuers toward observable areas rather than hidden ones. Women carried valuable supplies, remaining medicine, preserved food, tools, into concealed storage spaces Eliza had identified in the hillsides. They swept pathways to obscure footprints. They scattered ashes from the fire pit and covered the stones. They removed obvious signs of recent habitation from cabin exteriors. By mid-morning, the settlement looked abandoned again. Not entirely convincing under close inspection, but enough to create doubt about how many people were actually present and how long they'd been there. Annalise worked alongside other children, gathering scattered belongings and helping younger ones understand what was happening without terrifying them. "Are we leaving?" one small girl asked. "We're being careful," Annalise answered, "like when you play hiding games, but serious." Mara watched her daughter and felt pride mixed with crushing fear. Annalise had grown so much in these few days of freedom. The thought of her being dragged back into captivity was physically painful. Just after midday, lookouts spotted movement. A group approaching from the west, moving carefully but deliberately. 6 men in dark coats, federal marshals, identifiable by their uniforms and professional bearing. And leading them, dressed in work clothes but walking with familiar rigid authority, was Captain Silas Harrow. "Positions," Eliza commanded quietly. Women moved to predetermined spots, some visible, most hidden. They carried no weapons except tools that could serve double purpose if necessary. They weren't warriors. They were mothers, daughters, midwives, caregivers forced into defensive stance by a system that refused to let them simply exist. The marshals stopped at the settlement's edge. Harrow stepped forward, alone, carrying a white cloth tied to a branch. A parley signal. "I wish to speak with Mara Ellison," he called out. His voice carried the same controlled precision it always had. No anger, no excitement, just cold efficiency. Mara stepped into view. "I'm here. I represent federal authority authorized to retrieve fugitive property and restore legal order." He spoke like he was reading from a legal document. "You and these women are in violation of multiple statutes. However, I'm authorized to offer terms. We're not property. Mara said. "We're human beings establishing free settlement. Your legal status is not open to negotiation," Harrow replied, "but the manner of resolution is." He paused, and for the first time something other than professional detachment crossed his face. Something almost resembling satisfaction. "I have leverage you'll find persuasive." He gestured. 2 marshals stepped forward, and between them, hands bound, was Annalise. Mara's world stopped. Her daughter stood there, frightened but unharmed, eyes wide and searching until they found Mara's. Then Annalise's face crumpled with relief and terror combined. "Mama?" "Quiet," one marshal said sharply. Mara's legs nearly gave out. Eliza grabbed her arm, holding her upright. Around them, women gasped and cursed. Some cried out in outrage. "How?" Mara couldn't form complete words. "We captured her during pursuit 2 days ago," Harrow explained. "She'd fallen behind the main group, alone in the woods. Very fortunate we found her before something worse did." Liar. Annalise had been with them the entire time, which meant he'd taken her from the settlement somehow, perhaps during the night, perhaps using a scout they hadn't detected. The how didn't matter. Only the fact. "You have until dawn," Harrow continued. "Surrender yourselves, all of you, and the girl remains unharmed. Refuse, and she disappears into institutional placement somewhere you'll never find her. Federal orphanages in territories you can't reach. Do you understand?" Mara understood. He was using her daughter as a weapon, the same way the system always used children as weapons against mothers who dared resist. "Think carefully," Harrow added. "You've had your moment of rebellion. Now reality returns. Accept that and minimize suffering. Resist and suffer consequences far worse than before." He gestured to the marshals. They withdrew, taking Annalise with them. Her daughter looked back over her shoulder, mouthing words Mara couldn't hear. The marshals retreated beyond the settlement perimeter and began establishing a camp. Visible, contained. A perimeter designed to prevent escape. Mara collapsed to her knees. The strength that had carried her through escape, through flight, through building this fragile sanctuary, it shattered completely. Her daughter, her child, the entire reason for everything she'd done. Women gathered around her. Some touched her shoulders. Some wept. Eliza knelt beside her. "We fight," Eliza said fiercely. "We get her back." "How?" Mara whispered. "They have federal authority, legal documentation. Armed marshals. What do we have? Each other. This ground. Our refusal to surrender. But that wasn't enough. It had never been enough. The system was designed to crush exactly this kind of resistance. Night fell heavy and suffocating. The women gathered in the largest cabin to debate their options. Voices rose in argument. "We have to surrender," one woman insisted. "We can't let that child suffer for our choices." "Surrendering means we all suffer," another countered. "Separation, punishment, worse conditions than before. And Annalise still ends up enslaved anyway. Maybe we could negotiate partial surrender. Some stay, some go." "They won't accept that. It's all or nothing. We could fight, overwhelm them in darkness, and risk Annalise getting hurt in the chaos? Risk everyone?" Mara sat silent through it all. The voices washed over her like water. She heard the words, but couldn't process them. Her mind kept showing her Annalise's face, the fear in her daughter's eyes, the way she'd looked back as the marshals dragged her away. This was Mara's fault. She'd orchestrated the escape. She'd led them here. She'd believed freedom was possible. And now her daughter paid the price for that belief. Eventually, the debate exhausted itself. Women drifted to corners of the cabin or returned to their own shelters. Eliza tried to speak with Mara, but Mara couldn't respond. She walked outside and entered a small cabin at the settlement's edge, closing the door behind her. Alone in darkness, she let guilt consume her completely. She'd been arrogant, Naive, thinking she could outsmart a system designed by people with unlimited resources and legal authority. Thinking love and determination could overcome institutional power. Her daughter was suffering because of that arrogance. She thought about surrendering, walking out at dawn, offering herself in exchange for Annalise's freedom. But she knew Harrow wouldn't accept that. He wanted total victory, complete restoration of control. She thought about fighting, organizing an attack to free Annalise by force. But that risked her daughter's life, and the lives of every woman here. She thought about all the children she'd delivered into slavery over the years, all the mothers she'd watched broken by the same impossible choices she now faced. The system's cruelty wasn't random violence. It was this: calculated pressure applied to the bonds between mothers and children until something broke. Dawn approached with agonizing slowness. Mara didn't sleep. She sat in darkness and confronted the central truth of her existence. There were no good choices. There never had been. Every option led to suffering. The only question was whose suffering, and whether it meant anything. The first gray light appeared at the cabin's window. Mara stood. Her legs were stiff from sitting motionless all night. Her face was wet with tears she hadn't noticed crying. She stepped outside. Women were emerging from other cabins, faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. They looked to Mara for direction, for decision, for leadership she no longer felt capable of providing. But she was all they had. Eliza approached. "What do we do?" Mara looked toward the perimeter where Harrow's camp was visible through morning mist. She thought about her daughter. She thought about these 500 women who'd trusted her. She thought about the system that had pursued them with relentless, patient cruelty. And she made her decision. "We fight," she said quietly. "Not with violence, with strategy. We fight for Annalise and for our freedom. Both. No surrender." Mara's words hung in the dawn air like smoke. Women gathered closer, forming a tight circle around her. "How?" someone asked. "How do we fight federal marshals without getting killed?" "We don't fight like they expect," Mara said. She looked at Eliza. "We fight like we've survived, by being smarter, quieter, and using what they underestimate." Eliza's expression shifted from grief to sharp focus. "You have a plan. The beginning of one. I need help making it real." Within minutes, Mara had assembled a small group in the largest cabin. Eliza, Jonah, and 5 other women known for their quick thinking and steady nerves. They sat in a circle while early morning light filtered through gaps in the walls. "Harrow thinks we're cornered," Mara began. "He thinks we're desperate and disorganized. He expects either surrender or chaotic resistance. We give him neither." "What do we give him?" Jonah asked. "Confusion, misdirection. We use this terrain against him." Mara gestured toward the window. "This settlement sits in a natural bowl surrounded by ridges. Those ridges give us high ground for observation. The forest is dense enough to hide movement. The marshals are outsiders who don't know this land. They have training and weapons," one woman pointed out. "We have cooking pots and farming tools." "They have assumptions," Mara countered. "They assume we're property trying to run, not people capable of organized tactical thinking." Eliza leaned forward. "Keep talking." Mara outlined her thoughts. The terrain offered natural advantages. Steep slopes the marshals would struggle to navigate quickly, hollow logs that could amplify sound and create false signals, dense brush that could hide tripwires and barriers. The settlement itself could become a decoy, while their real movements happened elsewhere. "We need to separate them," Mara said. "Draw them away from each other. Harrow's strength is coordination and control. Break that, and he's just one man." "How do we draw them?" Jonah asked. "Fires, not destructive ones. Signal fires placed far from here, making them think we're fleeing in multiple directions. Marshals will split up to investigate." "What about Annalise?" Eliza's voice was hard. We can't start moving pieces until we know exactly where she is. Agreed. Mara looked at Jonah. Can you scout their camp without being detected? Jonah considered. Possibly. They're watching for groups, not individuals. And I know how to move quietly. Do it. We need to know which tent holds Annalise, how many guards, how she's restrained. Jonah nodded and left immediately. The remaining women spent the next hour developing details. They identified 6 elevated positions along the ridges surrounding the settlement, natural lookout points where observers could track marshal movements and relay signals. They located hollow logs and dead trees that would amplify sound, creating false indicators of activity in areas far from their actual positions. Trap lines, Eliza said. Not to hurt them, but to slow them down. Vines across paths at ankle height. Loose stones piled to create noise when disturbed. Markers only we recognize showing safe routes versus dangerous ones. How do we communicate during the operation? A woman named Sarah asked. We can't shout across distances. Bird calls, another woman suggested. We've used them before to signal danger. Different calls for different messages, Mara agreed. Mockingbird for guards approaching. Whippoorwill for position clear. Owl for emergency stop. They rehearsed the calls until everyone could recognize and reproduce them. Simple, clear, effective. Jonah returned just before noon, breathing hard from rapid movement. Found her. 3rd tent from the eastern edge. 2 guards outside, 1 inside. She's tied but not heavily restrained. They're not expecting rescue, just preventing her from running. How close can we get? Mara asked. Within 20 feet if you approach from the slope behind the tent. There's heavy brush cover. Mara felt something ignite in her chest. Hope. Dangerous and fragile, but real. Then we can reach her. If we draw enough marshals away, Eliza cautioned. Right now there's 6 of them plus Harrow. Even with 2 guarding Annalise, that's 5 nearby. So we draw 5 away and deal with 2. Mara's voice was steady. Manageable if we're smart. They spent the afternoon in careful preparation. Women moved to assigned positions, some to ridges for observation, some to locations where diversion fires would be lit, some positioned as decoys who would be briefly visible before disappearing into forest. Each person understood her role completely. Mara visited each group, checking readiness and offering quiet reassurance. These weren't soldiers. They were mothers, daughters, field workers, cooks, women who'd survived impossible circumstances through resilience rather than training. But that resilience was itself a kind of training. They knew how to read situations, adapt quickly, and protect each other. Sarah approached Mara near sunset. Some women are scared. They worry this will make things worse. It will make things different, Mara said. Worse or better depends on whether we execute cleanly. And if we don't? Mara met her eyes. Then we'll face consequences, but at least we'll face them having tried everything possible. Sarah nodded and returned to her group. As twilight deepened, the plan began. 3 women lit small fires at positions northeast, northwest, and due south of the settlement, each fire carefully controlled, producing enough smoke to be visible, but not enough to spread. Within minutes, marshals noticed. Mara watched from a concealed ridge position as Harrow emerged from his tent, pointing and issuing commands. 2 marshals headed northeast, 2 northwest, 1 toward the southern fire. That left Harrow and 2 guards at the camp, the 2 stationed near Annalise's tent. Now, Eliza whispered beside Mara. Phase 2 began. Women acting as decoys appeared briefly at the edges of firelight, then vanished. The marshals pursuing the fires spotted them and gave chase, moving deeper into forest where trip lines and false trails waited. Mara and Eliza descended from their ridge position, moving carefully down the slope behind the marshal camp. 3 other women followed, quiet, focused, carrying lengths of rope and cloth. They crept through heavy brush, using darkness and the marshal's distraction to close distance. Mara could see Annalise's tent now, canvas walls glowing faintly from an internal lamp. 2 guards stood outside, alert but watching the wrong directions, their attention drawn toward the fires and distant shouts of confused marshals. Closer. Mara's heart hammered, but her hands stayed steady. She'd delivered hundreds of babies in crisis situations. She knew how to function while terrified. One of the guards shifted position, turning slightly away. Eliza gestured. The women moved like shadows, reaching the tent's rear wall. Inside, Mara could hear voices. Harrow's voice, speaking to someone, probably the interior guard. Increased activity suggests desperation, Harrow was saying. Maintain position. They'll exhaust themselves shortly. Mara pressed against the canvas, listening. She could hear Annalise's breathing. Close. So close. Eliza pointed toward Harrow's tent, 15 feet away. Through a gap in the canvas, they could see his silhouette. One guard remained with him inside. The other marshals were scattered through the forest, chasing phantoms. Harrow was isolated with minimal protection, exactly as planned. Mara looked at Eliza. Her friend's expression was fierce and determined. They'd come this far. No retreat now. Together, they crept toward Harrow's tent, ready to execute the final phase of their desperate gamble. The guard outside Harrow's tent shifted his weight, rifle held loosely across his chest. He was young, maybe 20, with the nervous energy of someone trying to prove himself capable. He kept glancing toward the distant fires, clearly wanting to join the pursuit, but bound by orders to stay. Eliza moved first. She was faster than Mara expected, covering the ground between brush and tent in 3 silent strides. Before the guard could turn fully, she had wrapped a cloth around his mouth from behind, while another woman grabbed his arms. They pulled him backward, into shadow, keeping the rifle from falling and making noise. The guard struggled briefly, eyes wide with shock, but 4 women held him steady. They weren't trying to hurt him, just immobilize him. Rope circled his wrists, then his ankles. The cloth in his mouth prevented shouting. Within seconds, he was bound and lowered carefully to the ground behind a woodpile. "Stay quiet, and you'll be fine," Eliza whispered. "We're not here to harm you." The young marshal's eyes showed confusion more than fear. He stopped, struggling. Mara approached Annalise's tent, heart racing. She lifted the canvas edge carefully, peering inside. Her daughter sat on a wooden crate, wrists tied in front of her, ankles bound to the crate's legs. A single lamp burned on a supply box. The interior guard sat near the tent entrance, facing forward, unaware of movement behind him. Sarah slipped through the rear canvas opening, moving with remarkable quietness for someone untrained in such work. She reached the guard, just as he sensed something wrong and began to turn. Her arm went around his neck, not choking, but applying pressure to the sides in a technique Jonah had described earlier, something that restricted blood flow to the brain without crushing the windpipe. The guard's hands came up reflexively, grabbing at Sarah's arm, but within seconds his movements weakened. He slumped forward, unconscious, but breathing steadily. "Annalise," Mara whispered, entering the tent. Her daughter's head snapped up. Relief and terror mixed in her expression. "Mama!" "Quiet, baby. We're getting you out." Mara's hands trembled as she worked the knots at Annalise's wrists. The rope was tight, but not cruelly so. Harrow had needed her alive and undamaged for leverage. The knots came free. Annalise immediately wrapped her arms around Mara's neck, pressing her face against her mother's shoulder. "I thought—" Annalise's voice cracked. "I thought he'd take me somewhere you couldn't find me." "Never." Mara held her daughter tightly, feeling the warmth and realness of her. "Never." They bound the unconscious guard quickly, using his own belt and rope from the tent supplies. He would wake eventually, but not soon enough to interfere. Outside, Eliza stood near Harrow's tent entrance. She held up 3 fingers, then pointed inside. 3 people, Harrow and 2 others, likely marshals who'd returned from brief patrols. Mara positioned Annalise behind her, then nodded to Eliza. They had to move now, while surprise remained on their side. Eliza pulled back the tent flap suddenly, and Mara stepped through. Harrow sat at a portable desk, reviewing documents by lamplight. 2 marshals stood nearby, one at the tent's side, one near the rear. All 3 men turned simultaneously, shock registering on their faces. "What?" Harrow began. "Don't move," Eliza said, stepping in behind Mara. 6 more women entered through the tent's sides, surrounding the space. They carried no weapons, but their numbers and determination created an undeniable threat. Harrow's hand moved toward his belt, where a pistol rested in its holster. "I wouldn't," Mara said quietly. "You're outnumbered, and your men are scattered through the forest, chasing shadows." One marshal reached for his rifle, but Sarah stepped forward with the young guard's weapon, holding it awkwardly but meaningfully. "We don't want violence, but we'll use it if we must." The marshal froze. Harrow's face shifted through several expressions: surprise, anger, calculation. "You can't possibly believe this ends well for you." "Assaulting federal officers, kidnapping—" "Rescuing my daughter," Mara interrupted. "Defending ourselves from a man who profits from human suffering. I operate within the law." Harrow's voice was cold and controlled. "Everything I've done has legal sanction." "Legal doesn't mean right." Harrow stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Mara's face. "You're making a mistake. Even if you escape tonight, you'll be hunted. There's nowhere in this country you can hide from what you've done." "Maybe," Mara said, "but you won't be the one hunting us." Harrow moved suddenly, lunging toward the tent's rear exit. But the women had positioned themselves well. He crashed into 2 of them, stumbling. They grabbed his arms, pulling him off balance. He twisted free momentarily, bursting through the tent opening into darkness. "After him!" Eliza shouted. They pursued Harrow into the forest. He ran with desperate speed, branches whipping past him. But he didn't know this terrain the way they did. He couldn't see the slope ahead, the place where the ground dropped sharply into a natural ravine lined with thorny brush. Harrow's foot caught on a root. He pitched forward, tumbling down the slope, crying out as thorns tore at his clothes and skin. He landed hard at the bottom, gasping. The women surrounded the ravine's edge, looking down at him. Mara felt anger rise in her chest like fire. This man had stolen her daughter, had profited from the suffering of 500 women, had treated human beings as livestock to be bred and sold. She could climb down there, could let the other women do what anger demanded. Justice through violence, payment for every humiliation, every loss, every child torn from a mother's arms. Her hands shook with the desire for it. But Annalise stood beside her, watching, learning, seeing what her mother would choose when power finally shifted. "Bring him up," Mara said, carefully. "Don't hurt him." Several women descended into the ravine. Harrow tried to scramble away, but his ankle had twisted in the fall. They pulled him upward, supporting his weight despite his resistance, until he stood at the top surrounded by the people he'd tried to destroy. "You should kill me," Harrow said, breathing hard. Blood ran from scratches on his face and arms. "It's what I would do." "I know," Mara said. "That's the difference between us." They bound his hands and led him back toward the settlement. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. The scattered marshals returned one by one, drawn by the lack of further activity. They found their leader tied to a post near the central fire pit, surrounded by 500 women who stood in silent witness. The marshals stopped at the settlement's edge, rifles lowered uncertainly. "Your captain has committed crimes," Mara called out. "Falsified records, arranged illegal sales, operated a breeding farm that violated even the laws meant to protect property owners' investments. We have his ledgers. We have testimony. We have evidence. The marshals looked at each other, then at Harrow. "She's lying," Harrow said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Search his tent," Mara said. "Look at his documents, then decide who's telling the truth." 3 marshals entered the tent. Minutes passed. They emerged holding ledgers, faces troubled. "Captain," one said slowly, "these records show discrepancies." Harrow's expression hardened into something cold and hateful. The senior marshal stepped forward. "We came here to enforce the law, not to support someone who breaks it." He looked at Mara. "We're leaving, but this isn't over." "We know," Mara said. The marshals retreated, mounting their horses and riding away through morning light. They left Harrow behind, abandoned by the system he'd served. Jonah approached Mara quietly. "I've made contact with allies across the state line. Abolitionists who can document what happened here, who can expose the breeding farm's operations publicly." "How far?" 3 days' travel. I can guide a small group." Mara looked at Harrow, slumped against the post, defeat written across his features. "We take him to them," she said. "Not for revenge, for accountability." They traveled northwest, keeping to forest paths and avoiding roads. Harrow walked between guards, his hands bound, his face empty of expression. He spoke rarely, and when he did it was to predict their eventual capture and punishment. Mara didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that some people couldn't imagine a world different from the one they'd built. On the 3rd evening, they reached a farmhouse where lanterns burned in windows. Men and women emerged, white and black together, united by conviction rather than law. "We'll take him from here," a woman said. She was older, gray-haired, with eyes that had seen suffering and chosen action. "We'll ensure his crimes become public record." Mara watched as they led Harrow inside. He looked back once, his expression unreadable. "Will it matter?" Annalise asked quietly. "Will anything change?" "Not everywhere," Mara said. "Not quickly. But truth matters. Accountability matters. Even small justice is still justice." The journey back to the settlement took 2 days. They moved slowly, carrying exhaustion like physical weight. Mara walked beside Annalise, their hands linked, neither speaking much. Words felt unnecessary after everything that had happened. When they finally emerged from the forest and saw the familiar structures, several women broke down crying. Relief, disbelief, the simple impossibility that they had survived. Eliza stood at the settlement's entrance, counting heads as people arrived. Her expression remained controlled, but when Mara approached, she allowed herself a brief smile. "We did it," Eliza said quietly. "We did," Mara confirmed. That night, the women gathered around the central fire pit. They ate a simple meal of roasted tubers and wild greens. No one spoke of Harrow or the marshals or the breeding farm. Instead, they talked about small things: a repaired roof section, a productive vegetable patch, a child who had learned a new song. Morning came with work. The settlement needed extensive repairs. Weeks of hasty construction and minimal maintenance had left structures weakened. Roofs leaked. Fences sagged. The cistern required cleaning and reinforcement. Mara organized groups based on skills and physical capacity. Women who understood carpentry worked on cabins. Those with farming knowledge cleared and prepared soil. Others focused on gathering wild herbs, preserving food, and establishing storage systems. Annalise moved through the settlement quietly those first days. She helped where she could, but often retreated to isolated spaces, sitting alone near the cistern or walking the perimeter paths. Mara recognized trauma's patterns. Her daughter needed time to process what she'd experienced. On the 4th evening back, Mara found Annalise sitting outside their shared cabin, staring at nothing. "Can I sit?" Mara asked. Annalise nodded. They sat in silence for several minutes. Mara didn't push. She'd learned patience through years of midwifery, understanding that healing followed its own timeline. "I was so scared," Annalise finally said. Her voice was small, younger than her years. When Harrow took me, I thought I'd never see you again. I know, baby. He told me you'd abandon everyone else to save me, that you'd surrender the whole settlement. Annalise looked at her mother. Would you have? Mara considered the question carefully. I don't know. I wanted to. Every part of me wanted to give him whatever he demanded, if it meant keeping you safe. But you didn't. No. Because you wouldn't have wanted me to. And because those 500 women deserved freedom as much as you did. Annalise was quiet for a moment. It's hard, knowing you chose them too. I didn't choose them over you. I chose all of us, together. Mara touched her daughter's face gently. That's what community means. No one person matters more than the whole, but the whole protects each person. Even when it's hard? Especially then? Annalise leaned against her mother's shoulder. They sat together until darkness fell completely, watching fireflies emerge in the surrounding forest. The next morning, Annalise joined a group repairing the schoolhouse structure, a small building intended for teaching children. She worked quietly but steadily, carrying boards and holding materials, while others hammered and fitted pieces together. Eliza spent those days establishing defensive systems. She identified 3 natural choke points around the settlement and positioned lookout stations at each. She trained volunteers in rotation schedules and created simple signal systems using colored cloth and specific bird calls. We can't prevent discovery forever, she told Mara one afternoon, but we can make approaching difficult and give ourselves warning time. You think they'll come back? Maybe not Harrow's people, but someone will eventually notice 500 women missing from the labor economy. Someone will want to reclaim that property value. Eliza's expression was hard. We need to be ready. Mara nodded. She hated the necessity of constant vigilance, but she understood it. Freedom required eternal defense. Jonah prepared to leave on the settlement's 8th day. He gathered his few possessions and spoke with Mara near the forest edge. I'll spread word carefully, he said. Only to people I trust completely. Abolitionists, free black communities, Quaker networks, folks who might offer support or trade without compromising your location. Will we see you again? Eventually. But I'm more useful out there, creating connections. Jonah smiled slightly. You've built something remarkable here, something worth protecting. We had help. You had courage. Help just pointed the direction. He departed at dawn, disappearing into morning mist like a ghost. The settlement developed rhythms over the following weeks. Women rose at sunrise, worked through morning hours, rested during afternoon heat, and resumed activities in cooler evening temperatures. They established farming rotations, water collection schedules, and shared cooking responsibilities. Mara tended medical needs. She treated minor injuries, delivered preventive care, and taught several younger women basic healing techniques. Her supplies remained limited, but the surrounding forest provided medicinal herbs if one knew where to look. She often worked alongside a woman named Clara, who had experience with plant identification. Together they created a detailed map of useful vegetation, where to find willow bark for pain, yarrow for bleeding, chamomile for anxiety. Knowledge is survival, Clara said one afternoon, carefully pressing flowers between cloth pages. We can't rely on outside supplies forever. No, Mara agreed. We build what we need ourselves. One evening, several women gathered near the central fire pit to discuss education. A former house servant named Ruth suggested creating formal lessons for children and adults who'd never had opportunity to learn reading or mathematics. We can't let the next generation grow up ignorant, Ruth argued. Education is power. It's how we ensure this settlement survives beyond us. But who teaches? Someone asked. Most of us never learned ourselves. Then we learned together, Annalise said quietly. Everyone turned toward her. She'd been sitting at the group's edge, listening. I know some letters. And numbers. Not everything, but enough to start. Ruth smiled. Then we start. They organized the first formal lesson 3 days later. 15 people gathered in the repaired schoolhouse, children and adults mixed together. Annalise stood at the front, nervous but determined. She drew letters in dirt spread across a flat board, pronouncing each carefully. The students repeated after her, their voices uncertain but eager. Mara watched from the doorway, pride swelling in her chest. That night, Mara sat alone in her cabin with a journal, blank pages salvaged from Harrow's abandoned supplies. She lit a candle and began writing. We were 500 women who were told we were property. We were bred like livestock and sold like tools, but we chose differently. We chose freedom. This is our story, not the story others will tell about us, but the truth as we lived it. She wrote about the breeding farm, about the ledger, about the tunnels and the escape. She documented Harrow's capture and the settlement's founding. She wrote names, every woman who'd participated in their liberation, every child born into their community. The chronicle would grow over time, she decided. Different women would contribute their perspectives, their memories, their truths. Future generations would read these pages and understand what their ancestors had overcome. She wrote until the candle burned low, her hand cramping but her purpose clear. The next evening, the schoolhouse held its second lesson. Annalise had expanded the curriculum to include basic mathematics. She used stones and sticks to demonstrate addition and subtraction, moving them across the dirt board while students watched intently. A 6-year-old girl named Hannah successfully counted to 20 without error. The group applauded, and Hannah beamed with accomplishment. After the lesson, several children remained behind, asking Annalise questions about letters and words. She answered patiently, demonstrating each concept multiple times until understanding showed in their expressions. Mara entered as the last child departed. Annalise was cleaning the dirt board, smoothing the surface for tomorrow's lesson. "You're good at this," Mara said. Annalise looked up, surprised. "I'm just sharing what I know. That's what teaching is." They prepared the schoolhouse for the next day together, arranging seating logs and organizing the few salvaged books. When they finished, Annalise lit several candles around the room. "I like the light," she explained. "It makes learning feel special." That night, Mara added another entry to the chronicle. She wrote about the school, about Annalise's teaching, about Hannah's successful counting. Small moments that represented enormous victory. The settlement was becoming something beyond mere survival. It was becoming home. Outside, the forest settled into darkness. Inside the schoolhouse, candlelight flickered across walls where tomorrow's students would gather. Children who would learn letters and numbers not as tools of someone else's profit, but as foundations for their own chosen futures. Annalise stood among the candles, teaching 3 young girls their letters. They repeated after her, voices soft but determined. "A," Annalise said. "A," they echoed. "B, B." The lesson continued, each letter a small act of resistance against the system that had tried to keep them ignorant. Each word they learned was freedom made tangible. Mara watched from the doorway, the chronicle tucked under her arm. She would add tonight's lesson to its pages, would document this moment when enslaved children became students, when survival transformed into living. The candles burned steady and bright. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.